Welcome to today's format Visit and Nice. I don't think only I have become so fond of this program, but I know from the many letters that for some of you it has become a nice, fixed appointment during the week. Please believe me, the more you understand and know, and especially in the big sector, to maintain health, to improve health, but also to find the way back from an illness, knowledge is important. And knowledge is also about trust, of course, to give someone trust. And it's nice that there are more and more people who want it, who also understand the seriousness of a situation where we take a lot as given today and can't do as much as we can today. And sometimes it's the demanding patient, sometimes it's the person who also has to force medicine a little bit, that we doctors deal with questions that we are not used to having to answer. And of course, enlightenment helps, this wonderful channel helps, and it contributes to making everyone a person who has a greater awareness of life. And I also want to refer to a very short email from Rennie, and she writes that she has heard the program, the connection between chronic fatigue and leaky gut. Now there are people who switch on, who maybe don't know that much, and I talked about it in the program back then, that today we increase the permeability of the gut through our nutrition, through our life, so that the filtering of a really specific information in the body no longer works. And so that the body is of course overloaded chronically and things from the gut enter the organism, which of course now hold incredible immune processes under control, and that also a system can go into the knees at some point. And she writes that in June 2021 she always writes that she had recurrent diarrhea, and then she also got medicines that finally helped to stop the diarrhea over a longer period of time. But in the end it was a symptomatic therapy. And she writes that the gut and the stomach are still spooky today. That means it has become a very unstable area in her body. And she is still fatigued and would still need rest time every day. That means she is observing a process that has started since then and that she is not yet all that good. You are now asking me if I know colleagues in Germany, and I just have to answer that first. I don't know the region where they live at all. And what is always a good tip is that you ask the pharmacies, because pharmacies in the cities are actually always embedded and tend to put in their statements what doctors of course assign. Regardless of the fact that maybe a pharmacist himself is very interested in homeopathic things, in natural ingredients, food supplements. But in general, the pharmacy already shows the clientele of the doctors with whom they work together. You can learn very often about the pharmacies. Is there a holistic biologist in our region? That's one thing. The other thing is that laboratories nowadays also assign labor sets to you. Or through detailed investigations that you assign as a person or client to work with you. These laboratories also have a very good information material, or you can go into these laboratories and read into. One thing is to have an investigation, and the other is to understand this investigation and then of course also develop the appropriate treatment concept. But what strikes me is that some laboratories already give certain treatment instructions, and who is very, very exemplary and who delivers a very good, I would say, classified, professional explanation are the lab scans Immune in Minds and Biovis. These are labs that have developed incredibly innovatively, and I have such a laboratory in front of me. And what you have to know, of course, also at the moment, is that you have to exclude that chronic inflammation processes that are still taking place in the gut. Is a leaky gut syndrome perhaps now a result of this strong inflammation? Because a gut does not simply go into the diarrhea. If the diarrhea is acute, it is a protective reaction. This is the so-called excretion phase number 1 according to Rekaweg. And in the table of how diseases are also established, the first is the excretion phase, the second is the inflammation phase, the chronic inflammation, and then comes the degeneration phase. And all of this is still taking place somewhere in the connective tissue. Then Rekaweg speaks of biological cut, and now it's going to the intracellular level. That means, apart from the biological cut, everything is reversible. That's not a question at all. Only, of course, you have to understand this process. And if you say it's still such a latent, unstable situation today, then that's a stool diagnosis. And this stool diagnosis can be done only through a normal flora analysis that knows how the pH value is, how the mercomilieu is set up, is there a high candidate load, is the ratio of slime-producing bacteria in balance, are 80% of the anaerobic lactic acid-producing enterococci, or rather Echinococcus, lactobacilli, bifidobacteria. All of this is very, very important for you to know. And I can quickly find that out by such a flora analysis. But these laboratories also offer microbiome observations that go far beyond that. They can also measure the digestive residues. That means, indirectly, you have the indication that perhaps a pancreas, in its entire digestive system, no longer has 100% performance. This of course has an influence on the digestion of fat and protein, for example. Or, what is the percentage of gallic acid? Do I have a loss of gallic acid, or do I also have a good digestion of fat, for example? You can see by means of these microbiome stress levels whether there are silent inflammations, whether there are minor inflammations that no one registers anymore. And again, chronic, latent, subtle silent inflammation only through grain alone. Gluten makes it 85% in the grain. This condition can be reinforced again and again. All of this should be known. Calprotectin leads you to whether there is perhaps a food intolerance. Food that makes you inflame after 4 to 70 hours. You can measure alpha antitrypsin. You can measure pancreatic elastase. That is the performance of the pancreas to measure. And you can measure the mucous membrane immunity. This is the so-called secretory IgA. These are all highly interesting parameters that naturally show the situation of the intestine. This is not at all to be put in a relationship with a coloscopy. A coloscopy cannot give you answers to any of these questions. But it is only the macroscopic view that searches. Do I have polyps? Do I have none? Is there perhaps a diverticle? Is there perhaps an adenocarcinoma? Let's forget that now, because then you will come pretty late. Such a thing cannot develop on a healthy mucous membrane. That is why the mucous membrane care must be really well thought out here. In addition to a laboratory examination that perhaps concerns the intestine and that the microbiological balance meets a statement, you can also do laboratory tests, which, I would say, exclude exhaustion and fatigue through valuable laboratory tests within the framework of a so-called nitro-stress profile. There you have the methylmalone acid and see intracellular how much B12 the cell actually remains. You can make statements about the laboratory profile, how far the mitochondria, the cell's energy performance, is still in 100% supply. You can analyze the cofactors of this cell breathing, this mitochondrial performance, and also Q10, for example, in the metabolism. But a complementary medical doctor knows this and can then do all this for you and also for these laboratories. The other question is, of course, was there a high parasitic load back then? And is the parasitic load still the one that is there, if the whole system is still unstable? You should also analyze that. Labs also provide an examination option here. A lot has been done in the stool diagnosis, in terms of parasitic diagnosis, profiles of parasites, but that is also a bit of a momentary recording. It might be better to do an energy examination on parasites via electroacupuncture to full or maybe also bioresonance. If you are constantly in conflict with the gut, please also exclude a histamine intolerance. The histamine intolerance is noticeable through many symptoms, but it is also important to know the activity of the diamine oxidase, which is of course dependent on the content of zinc, for example, and vitamin B6. That means that these are also valuable things that should be excluded from laboratory diagnosis. However, as part of the parasitic things, it is always good to excrete the biofilm once a year. Parasites need this biofilm to unmask yourselves. This would make the resorption performance weaker. The biofilm is very close to the intestinal mucosa, and we give this process the opportunity to relieve itself via the vitamin D detox program. We have achieved very nice results with this. As part of a natural parasitic treatment or a targeted parasitic treatment, we have a lot of possibilities to follow up on this today. If you develop a build-up program for the body, a specific diagnosis may be carried out in advance. I hope that I have given you some hints about some of the things here. I also hope that you are not an amalgam carrier still, that you also face toxic stress with a certain respect if you are still in the dental jaw area. Don't forget that with every sip, with every too hot, too cold, these things come off these fillings and are swallowed down. Shelf life of this toxin is up to 20, 30 years. Again, What is in the body is tried to detoxify via the liver. It always happens via the small intestine. These processes are not over, even if you have perhaps cleaned up the dental jaw area a few years ago. Then the question still arises: what remains as a remnant and can of course destabilize the intestinal health here as well. These are things that no longer make it so spooky, that make it more resistant, that make it more powerful. A healthy intestine is of course really 50 to 60% also a vital health, because it has consequences. An intestine that is so unstable must of course also neglect supply. This has of course also a meaning for many cellular and immunological processes. That's why I'm so behind in taking care of the health of an organ. Everything else is of course associated with a completely different metabolism. The supply of the body is far from optimal. The body is a bit merciless to want to take on these processes every day, because it also gives us a certain ability to adapt to life and must fall back on reserves if he does his tasks, as he does with a very large effort, but he himself then wants to be and be taken care of. It's nice that you ask the question and say, I have to do something here. Because I just noticed that it's not just limited to my gut for a long time, I lack the strength to live or the weakness that spreads here. These are valuable questions you have to ask yourself. When the word parasite comes out of my mouth, I mean to reactivate viruses. EBV does this fatigue symptom and a lot more. Stress plays a big role. Adrenal glands are to be looked at, DHEA. I don't know at what age they are. That's the adrenal glands hormone from which estrogen and testosterone are created. So there is a big topic for these things, but if you take it step by step and take care of the roots of the plant human, I think you will get a whole lot further. Well, that said, we have a few minutes left and maybe 2 more little hints at the end. What is healthy nutrition? And maybe a little tip, we should look a little bit at people who have also, in the context of their food culture, a completely different social or ecological behavior. And of course, maybe the Italians who also eat white bread and not maybe be a role model, but Italians and French, that doesn't compare directly to life age. I looked it up, it's already very high in Western Europe. That doesn't tend very far apart. That's both for men and for women 80 and over 80 years. But they have a different culture and they celebrate their food and they also eat with a certain calmness, with a joy, because they claim the society for yourselves. That's a highlight of the day, even if the time of the day is pretty late, and the nutrition forces are of course by far not the same anymore, but they do it with a lot of pleasure and with joy and with openness, and then a lot of things flow differently. And these are things that of course don't happen in stress, that don't happen alone, that don't happen in tension. And we should look to the Greeks and the Spaniards and the French. That we also like to celebrate the glass of wine with great joy. But that's the art, to leave it at that. That's the art of not eating in between. That's the art of eating meals, but then also having rest times and being slowly there and perhaps also needing less through it. And that's the way of life you live, the joy you connect with. These are people who enjoy life from the fullest, but don't connect with the fact that the enjoyment always has to end in a boundless, but with a great awareness that leaves things in the special. And I don't necessarily want to appeal that the glass of wine always has to be on the table in the evening, but if there was only one and it would contribute to the fact that I am happy after a day where I have given a lot, when joy is there, then there is a lot to tolerate and accept for the organism and not have to drink 3 glasses of wine out of grief. That is in a completely different relationship. I think then these are things where enjoyment and joy are behind, which are also wonderfully activated by the body. And especially the alcohol-dependent transaminase that breaks it down, it is very soft and quiet, always activated again and again to be ready for processes. The respirator in red wine, the anti-inflammatory effect, of course, these are only traces, these are not quantities and they should never be quantities, but it is not the most toxic food now. It is much more toxic that the gall runs over you and you are in stress or anger. These are things that are far more weakening the organism than living joy, radiating joy, giving love. Then this is also allowed within such a story to have a certain completeness. In this sense, I wish you all a wonderful coming week. I am already looking forward to your answers, to your feedback, to your resonance. And of course, it is always nice for me to deal with one or the other thing, to grow in it sometimes to ask myself again, to have the ear on life. And I think you can never repeat enough things again and again, so that they become a nice self-evident to you, you like me. Then it's all very much fun. In this sense, I wish you all a good time and I am very looking forward to seeing you again.